This is Forbidden Speech, the raw truth, with your host, Christina Rivera. In this Savvy Broadcasting series, we delve into hot topics affecting us all. With cancel culture and big tech censoring any opposing ideas and thoughts outside of mainstream ideology, it has become more important than ever that we tell the raw truth about everything from U.S. world politics, COVID, Christianity, and everything in between. We invite all points of view to come and share their perspective honestly and respectfully. Hi, Brian Ridolfi. Welcome to Savvy Broadcasting's Forbidden Speech, the raw truth. We're very grateful to have you here today. And this particular series deals with topics that we really need to touch on that might be a little sensitive, but we need to bring to the forefront and have honest dialogue and conversation together on these topics so that we can move and grow forward as a world and country. And you've written a very interesting book called Chains of Slavery. It is a fiction book, but very much talking about a lot of stuff that's come to be in the present, as we just touched on before we went live here. But before we go to share your, you've written a number of books, but before we go to share some of the Chains of Slavery lessons, I'd like for you to share with our audience, like, what brought you to even write the book?
First off, thanks for having me on. I wrote the book because I thought that would be the best venue to get this message out, that instead of it just being a treatise or a nonfiction book, I thought maybe a story with information that people can use and people can learn from the book or learn from the story instead of just presenting facts in a nonfiction way. Yeah. So I thought I would make an entertaining book alongside a book that gives you facts of how we got to where we are and where we're going if we stay on the current course.
Yeah, it's interesting because how it starts is there's people who are in jail, and the one guy begins to break it down for him and say, here's where we are, and here's the cautionary tale where we can end up. And one thing I really pulled from is one of the characters says, slavery started a chain of events that caused America to go full circle. Slavery for one group of people produced slavery for all people. And it's interesting when I read that, because I thought, that's what I keep saying to people who kind of have this idea of hate speech. Let's cancel this group. I don't like that ideology. We should only have this ideology. And I'm thinking, by shutting down a group of individuals or people you don't agree with, for one, hate speech is what? It's just speech. But thereby, eventually, it'll be your speech, because who's the arbiter of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable?
Yeah, that's the thing, is if you take a right away from one person, you've taken away from everybody. So even if things you don't like, you have to allow people to do it, because it could be you next, as you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, and also it doesn't mean that in a civil society, we don't have certain rules. Like, we've always had, you can't murder your neighbor or stuff like that. Yeah. But the idea of like certain ideas or thoughts or words or ideas are the only acceptable ones, or the ones in this box. That just puts everyone in a dire situation, because one day it'll be your thoughts, words that are in a box. And we don't want that. We want to be able to express ourselves and have real dialogue and conversation together.
Yeah, I think the tyranny pretty much began with political correctness, because even though it wasn't illegal to say certain things, people were driven away from saying certain things. Yeah. Not because necessarily you would be punished by law, but you would be ostracized or potentially, maybe fired or something. But that's where it started. Now we're getting to a whole new phase where you got, these, the government actually wants to, by law, limit speech. So yeah. we've gone on to the next level.
And it's been kind of an ever growing bit by bit process. I remember a number of years ago being in my corporate job, and I was uncomfortable to say Merry Christmas, because it was like, oh, say Happy Holidays. It just sounds better. You might offend some people who don't celebrate Christmas. I'm like, well, if they don't, then what's the harm of me saying Merry Christmas? I remember holding myself back, saying maybe I shouldn't say Merry Christmas.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. First, it starts with, should I say Merry Christmas? Now we're getting to the point where you call a woman she, and she doesn't want to be called she, he, you can get in trouble now for using the wrong pronoun. So Yeah, it started with Merry Christmas and that kind of thing. Now we're getting to, you can actually be punished by law for telling the truth.
Yeah. And it's kind of nutty because the thing is, now it leaves you in a very slippery slope. I had seen a video yesterday where it was put forth to corporate companies that put he, him, she, her, whatever, or whatever pronouns you desire, so that when the person emails you, they know how to address you and there won't be any confusion. I'm like, in the past, I saw your name is Christina. I would just say her. I wouldn't even have to be like, oh, let me look down at the below. It says he, her, or, whatever. So, I mean, it just leaves us all being uncomfortable. Like, how do we just treat each other like human beings? And now what bothers me most, Brian, and tell me your perspective, is that it puts everyone into teeny boxes. Like you're the gender she, or you're black, or you're white. And I'm like, I'm not just female. I'm just not a white person. I'm like, who you are as an essence of your human person isn't just in these teeny boxes. If you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think the problem is they're redefining things. So we used to go by definitions, by biological truths and that. But now because of relativism, you don't know what's up and down anymore. So if you see a dog and the dog, and somebody's offended that you call the dog a dog, you could get in trouble now. So in their mind, it's a cat, even though by definition, it's a dog. And so that's the scary thing is you're being punished, not for being violent or being offensive. You're being punished for telling the truth now, which is very convoluted.
It is because, and I know I've heard my truth, it's her truth. But the thing is, if we're all operating under it's my relative universe and it's whatever I perceive in my universe, then how do we all jive together? Because we will all have a different perspective. So how do we even live life if, your perspective is this and mine is counter that? And like, how do we have what we have before? As you said, we had definitions that we all agreed upon. And if we don't agree on any definition, how do we go forward as a society?
Yeah, it all unravels when you don't have truth anymore. I mean, because this didn't happen, overnight. This started with relativism and it just evolved. And then it becomes now where in the book, I talk about the paradox of tolerance, where they can only tolerate tolerance until it gets in the way of their dogma. So now you have a tyranny which imposes truth on everybody. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's not really tolerance in the absolute sense where you tolerate all views. You tolerate what you can tolerate as long as it doesn't get in the way of their ideology. And so anything that's outside of their ideology, they don't tolerate anymore.
Well, it's quite confusing because whose ideology are we going to go with? Like, which is the right and correct one? Today it could be this, tomorrow it's another one. So not deciding as a whole, as a people, this is what we all are going to agree on, and it's not going to shift from day to day. Now we know a starting point. If we don't have a starting point, then as you said, it completely unravels. Now, the interesting thing about this tyranny that we're talking about right here, right now, is it's different in the past when you said had maybe a government overseer where you knew who who the dictators were, because you could put a face on them. But now, if everyone's just living like in their own individual kind of universe, we don't really have a face to the dictator. It's like almost everyone is dictating over someone else.
Yeah, it's a dictatorship of chaos, I guess.
Yeah.
It's not, like I said, you're right. Before you knew who to avoid, you would stay away from
Stalin, it's Hitler.
Exactly. Yeah, now you don't even know if you're offending anybody. I mean, it's like I said, it's very subjective. It's a subjective tyranny where people, it's not based on, you get out of line, we're going to punish you. It's you offended this guy, we're going to punish you, but you didn't offend it, but you offended this guy and you don't get punished. So it still boils down to an ideology. It's a left-wing tyranny. They're weeding out all the opposition to their way of thinking. It really does boil down. It's still Stalinism and Marxism, but they're just doing it a different way. They're instead of throwing you into a gulag, they're going to cancel you. They're going to fire you. So it's a less violent. but in the end, it's just as dangerous.
Oh yeah, because you can't exist in society. And it's sad. Like I've said earlier to us getting started with this interview, I've had friends that say, well, I don't like a certain type of comedy or whatever. And I said to her, but who gets to be the arbiter of the correct comedy? Because one day it could be the comedy you do enjoy, or, the thoughts you do enjoy. So, it's a very dangerous. What is your idea of how we backtrack and get to more normal society where we're not just trying to cancel each other and see only a certain thought or beliefs as the only right thoughts? How do we go backward and backtrack out of this?
Well, I think you have to go back to being able to tell the truth without consequence. I mean, if you lie, that's liable. Yes, you're liable for that. But if you say something that's provably true, you shouldn't be punished for that. And I think we have to get back to the government protecting everyone's rights. So whether the government agrees with the speech or it doesn't agree with it, they got to protect everyone's rights. You can't have a two-tier system of justice like you have now, where some people are punished for offensive comments and other people are not. I mean, like I said, it's still a tyranny of ideology. It's just the methodology is different. So we got to get back to just weights and just balances, where everybody's treated the same, and you can't be prosecuted because you're Republican and not prosecuted because you're Democrat. We have to get back to just weights and just balances.
Yeah. And I think for, when I talk to a lot of people on the street, and they're like, yeah, I'm uncomfortable with, say, the tyranny of thought and word, but if whatever I have to do to make things calm and balanced, because I think most people just don't want to rock the boat. They're like, hey, if I don't say Merry Christmas, I say Happy Holidays, what's the big deal? But I think what people don't realize that it becomes a bigger and bigger snowball, that you really have to start taking a stand and holding your representatives accountable, and just speak up when it becomes, like at work, you can't say Merry Christmas to a coworker because you'll get in trouble. I think you have to honestly say, okay, I'm going to speak honestly, and here's how I feel, and not be stunted to not tell the truth. Because I think the more we let it go and say, well, I just want to make everyone feel okay, let me just, do what they want, or whatever the prevailing, status quo thought is. Because it, like what I'm saying here is it snowballs to the point where then you can't speak at all.
Yes. Yeah. I think when I was younger in school, we would study the Nazis and the Bolsheviks. And you say, well, how did these people allow this to happen? Now I understand. It's fear. Once you become afraid, that's usually when the tyranny starts. It could start small, but it doesn't. You don't go from freedom to tyranny overnight. It's people are afraid to do something. They're afraid to speak. They're afraid to act. And that's where it begins. And we got to stop being afraid to say what is true.
Yeah.
And I think if people do that, I think we can reverse this trend, because they're really not as strong as people think.
No,
it's really a tyranny of a very small group of people. And if everybody says, no, we're not going to play the game anymore, I'm going to tell like it is. If we do that, we can reverse the course.
Yeah, I totally agree. I remember years ago, I was riding the subway in New York, and there was someone getting abusive to someone else, just being verbally abusive. They weren't hitting them, but they just kept carrying on. And I was just like, whoa, this has got to stop. So no one was saying anything. How, I don't know if you've been to New York, but most people were just like, if I just mind my own business and don't pay attention, it'll go away. But this is a quite packed train. And it seemed, by the way, this one person was carrying on verbally abusive, that it was going to escalate to violence. And so I just said, hey, whoa, take it outside. If you got a problem, speak it outside. Take this outside. We don't need to hear this in the morning, that we're all going to work stressed. And, immediately me piping up and saying that, the rest of the train started to ban and be like, yeah, that's right. Take it outside. But it took me just saying and pointing out, like, hey, this is uncalled for. If you both have a beef, take it out in the patio, on the platform, and talk it out reasonably. We all don't need to be part of your screaming and hollering match. But they did. They took it outside, and we went about to work. But it's interesting how sometimes, if people get past their fear of being able to speak freely, other people are like, oh yeah, that's right, I agree. But it often just takes that one person just standing up and telling the truth.
Yeah, exactly. It takes one person to break the ice.
Yeah.
And then usually, because people some people are going to just do it and other people are going to wait for somebody else to do it first. Yeah. I remember when I was in college, I used to, a lot of the professors, I didn't agree with what they were saying. So I would tell them I don't agree.
Mm-hmm.
And then after class, people come up to me and say, I agree with you, but I just don't want to say anything.
Yeah.
But, it takes somebody just tell it like it is. If somebody's,
mm-hmm.
what they're saying is false, point it out.
Yeah.
It doesn't, and if you suffer the consequence, I think people will notice that and they'll say, maybe I should stand up with this person. And
yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it gets to deeper than that. There was a gal I know who works around here, and her job was pushing her to get the vaccine, the COVID vaccine. And she had a negative side effect when she herself went just personally to get it because she was worried about getting COVID. And so she had, I don't know what you call when your heart gets enlarged, but she had some negative side effects. So anyway, when her job said, okay, everyone needs to get a second booster or whatever, she said, hey, I kind of almost died, so I'm going to pass this time. And they're like, no, everyone needs to do it or you're going to be let go. And she was like, no, I can't. But by her, going to HR and then showing the doctor's note, she was able to, not have to take a second shot and, maybe end up hurting herself more. But she also got some other people who had issues or fears to be addressed. And so I think it was great that she felt strong enough to talk about her fear, because just to get along and be like, well, I'll just take the second, hopefully this one won't kill me, is not the way you want to go. Because in her case, she really had a very negative side effect for the first time around.
Oh yeah, I can understand. You definitely don't want to get another shot if something like that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm glad she spoke up, because in cases like that, it might not just be a negative side effect where you get a write-up because you said something that maybe some people didn't feel comfortable with. But in her case, she didn't speak up and just said, I'm just going to go along to get along because I just want to keep my job. She could very well not have a job at all because she's going to be 6 feet under. And, that's not worth it. No job's worth that. So, you've written your book, what do you hope that will be the number one message that people take away?
Well, what I want people to learn is that basically history just repeats itself. And so we're on a course that others have been on in the past. And if we continue on this course, we're just going to suffer just like them. And, you're going to have a government that's just going to tell you what to do. And if they take over all the power, there's not going to be anything you can do about it. For a very long time. So I'm saying, just learn the lessons of history. Don't make the same mistakes. And there's still a chance to avoid the pitfall. So I'm just saying, that's why I want people to know how we got to where we are. So about 80% of the book is a history lesson telling how we got to where we are. And the other 20% it is a prediction about the future, which a lot has come to pass actually over the past few years. So I would say just become more learned, understand what's going on. No, a lot of people don't know how our system of government works. They don't know about economics. Learn more about those kind of things, and then you won't be in the dark, and you won't be overtaken in an instant.
Yeah. Because when you have this, it arms you, the knowledge arms you to say, okay, here's what's really going on. I think what ends up happening with a lot of what's going on right now with cancel culture or whatever, there's this idea of when you feel transgressioned or you feel like someone disrespected or whatever the word is, you're coming at it from emotion because you feel like, oh, they disrespected me, or they don't realize I'm Jewish, I don't celebrate Christmas, or whatever it is. That maybe no, they didn't know. They were just wishing you a Merry Christmas. And from coming at it from the perspective that there's only a right way, wrong way to think, how dare they said this or did that, whatever, instead of having a dialogue and saying, okay, let me not look at this emotionally. Let me just say what they really meant, and so that we can have a honest human to human conversation.
Yeah, offense is a part of life. You just got to realize that you're going to get offended. There's just no way to avoid it. But the problem is, government is protecting some people and not others. So they'll protect, say like transgendered people, but they won't protect Christians. So, Christians can be offended too, but they don't care. It's just certain groups that get protected and others don't. So like I said before, we got to have just weights and just balances. We got to live according to the rule of law.
Exactly. And we don't want the rule of law to be whatever it is today, whatever this person feels like or that person feels like, because then we have nothing to stand on. It's like standing on sand, or there's no concrete foundation. But this has been a great conversation, but it reminds me, Brian, just before we leave here, there's a book I read a number of years ago by a German citizen who had been around during the time of Nazi reign. And he wrote the book way after World War II, but he said, many people have asked us German people, how did we ever let him get to power the way he did, and the tyranny and what happened to the Jews? And he said, it wasn't a one-step process. It was basically like, oh, it looks good, he's going to help us all, the finances are going to get better. And then bit by bit, the narrative with, your problems are really these people over here. All of this started to come about bit by bit until, the flag comes down and there's machine guns on the corner, and, and then it got to the point where now I'm scared of having my head blown off and I'm not going to say anything. I thought it was a really interesting cautionary tale, which I don't remember the book, unfortunately, the name of it. But what I remember being amazed at, I was thinking the same thing. How could a whole group of people be that dumb? Mm-hmm. And as you said, this is not the first time. Nazi Germany wasn't the first time. What's going on right now isn't the first time. It's happened over and over and over again in human history. But I love that you've written this cautionary tale. Where can people get a copy of Chains of Slavery and find out more about you?
Well, they can go to my website at brianridolfi.com, BrianRidolfi.com. And you can get my books wherever books are sold.
Awesome. That's wonderful. Well, I thank you again for really putting this message out there. We really need to look at it deeper, see our history, where we're going, and how we can really pull back from this not good direction we're going in. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Brian Ridolfi, for coming to Savvy Broadcasting's Forbidden Speech.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Like, subscribe, and share this episode. To listen to more Forbidden Speech or Savvy episodes, visit SavvyBroadcasting.com. To find out about our paid sponsorship opportunities or how to become a guest, email Christina at lifeunscriptedradio.com.